Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your questions on the SSP. I hope I have answered your questions to your satisfaction. I now hand you over to Ms. Ruth Molefe, our skills planning practitioner, who will then present to you SASSETA's mandatory grant processes.
Thank you, Mr. Program Director. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to take you through the presentation of mandatory grant processes. The topic that we're going to talk about are as follows. We're starting with the purpose of mandatory grant, qualifying criteria for the MG disbursement, disbursement of mandatory grants, mandatory grant disbursement dates, mandatory grant process, inter-SASSETA transfer, and the WSP and ATR tips. Those who have attended the SASSETA roadshow before know this information. But for those who are submitting for the first time, I want to explain this information in detail so that they understand the processes of the mandatory grant. The purpose of mandatory grant is to fund the education and training programs captured in the Workplace Skills Plan and the annual training report. Therefore, the mandatory grant serves as an incentive to employers to plan and implement training for the employees. It promotes NQF registered qualification to address skill gap in the sector. It intended to improve the quality of labor market information collected by the SASSETA from employer in the sector to inform the sector skills plan. Employers wanting to claim the mandatory grant must meet the following criteria for the payment of mandatory grant. These criteria are as follows. The employer must register with the South African Revenue Services in terms of the Skills Development Act. The employer must contribute skills development levies to SARS in a prescribed manner. They have to submit WSP ATR, which was subsequently approved by SASSETA. Employer must be up to date with the levy payment at the time of approval of their WSP and the ATR. Employer must have submitted their WSP ATR by the deadline of 30 April 2021, as contemplated in the SASSETA grant regulation. They must ensure that they are registered with the correct SASSETA, which is SASSETA 19. Employer must have provided evidence that the WSP and the ATR have been subject to consultation with recognized trade union. It is important to note that the WSP submission of newly registered employers is due within 6 months after registering with SARS and the Companies and Intellectual Property Commission. When that happens, the employer must submit the WSP, attaching all supporting documents to their WSP, indicating that they have just been established. They have just been registered and established. Disbursement of mandatory grant says that upon approval of the Workplace Skills Plan, the employer qualify to be paid 20% of skills development levies paid to SARS as mandatory grant over 4 quarters. According to the grant regulation, it states that the payment of mandatory grant will be done on a quarterly basis. And the unclaimed mandatory grant within the period specified in sub-regulation 2 of the SASSETA grant regulations will be transferred towards discretionary grant funding by 15 August annually. Dates of the mandatory grant disbursement are scheduled as follows. Payment will be made on quarterly tranches. We're starting with quarter 1. Quarter 1, it's scheduled to pay mandatory grant on the 30th of June 2021. Quarter 2, it's 30 September 2021. Quarter 3, according to schedule, it's 31 December 2021. but because of the December holiday, this payment will be made earlier than that. Quarter 4 payment is scheduled for 31st March 2022. The process of MG goes as follows. We're starting with the MG advert. That's where the SASSETA would place an ad on a national newspaper and also post an ad on the website to remind the stakeholders to submit their WSP before the 30th of April. And then stage number 2 is about the submission of online WSP. That's where the SDF will submit their WSP on an Indesium system. And the system will then generate an acknowledgement letter. Then we then start with the evaluation of WSP and the ATR. That's when now the practitioners will do the quality check to check if the WSP meet all the quality standard that we've just talked about in the previous slides. And then once the WSP has been evaluated okay, the status will move to interim approval or rejection or query. Once the query is resolved, it will change to interim approval. All the interim approval status will then be approved by the head of department. And then finance department will start to run the system to disperse payment to qualifying employers. And lastly, the Skills Planning Research Department will draft letters to inform employers about the mandatory grant payment that have been made. We are bringing this information to your attention about the inter-SASSETA transfer because occasionally SASSETA receive application from employer requesting to be transferred from other SASSETA, from one SASSETA to SASSETA, or the other way around. This process is referred as inter-SASSETA transfer, IST. IST applications are largely motivated by the change in the core business of the employer. The IST process is as follows. It starts with the applicants completing the IST-01 form to initiate the process. Then the SASSETA capture the information in the IST-01 form on the DHEAD levy portal. The initial SASSETA will approve or decline the application with reasons. The applicant will complete the IST-04 form to appeal decision of the initial SASSETA. DHEAD will make a ruling about applicants who completed IST-04 forms. SARS will effect changes on completion of the IST process. Then the SASSETA upload information monthly to update employers or applicant about the inter-SASSETA transfer. The tips for the WSP. Here I would like to urge our stakeholders to start the process as early as possible. And then in doing that, they have to conduct a training needs analysis so that they could collect information of the WSP. When they do the analysis of their skills within the organization, they need to ask themselves the following questions. It is important for the SDF to have an understanding of what are the key organizational goals and objectives. What skills does the organizations need to have in the future? What skills and competencies are required to meet the business objectives? What are the current capabilities of employees? What training interventions are available to close training gaps? And formulate company and individual training plans. And once this information is collected, it will be easy now for the XDF to put this information into their workplace skills plan. Because as SASSETA would want to have a credible information as this information is used to inform the SASSETA sector skills plan. I now hand back to the Mr. Program Director. Thank you very much.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen, on the mandatory grant. Thank you very much, Ruth, for the informative and comprehensive presentation on the mandatory grant. I hope you really enjoyed it, ladies and gentlemen. We are now going to tackle the Q&A for the MG. The first question that we have for Ruth is, can a company apply for the mandatory grant when they did not submit a previous WSP?
Thank you very much, Program Director. That is a very good question. When you submit the WSP, remember SASSETA is using the online form for the submission of workplace skills plan. Now, when you start to create your workplace skills plan 2021-2022, the form will ask you to say, is it a first-time submission or not? So in this instance, it means now the client is the first time they submit the WSP. All you have to do is to click on yes. By doing so, the form that will be generated, it will allow you now to capture only the information, only the part of the workplace skills plan. The annual training report, it won't be there. But now comes next year. What is important in this instance, it means now every training that you embark on as an employer, you need to keep records of all those training interventions. And even the evidence of such training must be kept safe. So that next year, when now you report to SASSETA about the implementation of that previous WSP, you need to also consult those evidence so that you can populate your annual training report. But the answer is yes, the system will allow you to submit your application for the mandatory grant, even if it is a first-time submission.
Okay, thanks a lot, Maggie. The second question, how do we get to register as an SDL payer?
Well, as an employer, if you want to register as a levy payer, all you have to do is to make an application with the Commissioner of SARS. This application, when you do it, you must go to a branch where you're in an area where your business is situated. And what is important now is that during the application, an employer has to inform or to tell the SARS officials that they should be classified under safety and security SETA. Because by doing so, you avoid a situation of being wrongly allocated to a different SETA. And to start now doing that, applying for the inter-SETA transfer, it is a process. You have right from the onset, from the word go, informed that you should be registered under the Safety and Security SETA, which is SETA 19. Remember, in South Africa, we have 21 SETAs. Therefore, SASSETA is one of those 21 SETAs.
Thanks a lot, Maggie. The next question, can SASSETA fund my training?
Yes. If you remember during my presentation, I indicated that the main purpose of the mandatory grant is to fund the training that the employer offer to the employees. So once you've submitted your WSP, and we go through your WSP to do all the quality checks, if your WSP, if everything is in order, then we approve your WSP. The moment the document is approved, it means now that you qualify 20% of your contribution.
Okay, thanks for your response. The next question, what is the due date for the submission of WSPs?
Okay, as contemplated in the SETA grant regulation, it says that the submission of the WSP is the 31st of April each year. However, the grant regulation also stipulated the SETA accounting authority may grant an extension up to a period of 1 month, and then subject to the written request, which means that if you realize that you won't be able to meet the deadline, you need to inform SASSETA in writing and also state the valid reasons why you cannot meet the deadline. So the fund, SASSETA can fund your education and training, yes. And the deadline is 30 April 2022 for this year.
2021.
Oh, yes, 2021.
Thank you. Thanks,
and the program director, maybe it is also important to indicate that also the grant regulation allows the companies that are newly established to submit their even if the deadline period has passed. But for the purpose that it is a newly established company, you have the right to inform Sasita, and then Sasita can now open a system for you to capture your workplace skills plan. Only the workplace skills plan, because it is a new company. Yes.
Thank you very much, Maki. Maybe just to recap quickly on the question of the deadlines. The usual deadline is end of April, midnight. So on the 30th of April every year, that is the deadline, that is the cut-off date and time for the submission of WSP. If you have not submitted by 12 o'clock midnight on the 30th of April, it's a problem. But as Mikey has already indicated, companies that are of the view that they are not as yet ready, or they will be ready, they will not be ready by the time of the cutoff date that is legislated, they may apply for an extension. It is not automatic. They have to apply and it must be granted. So do not be labor under the impression that once you have not submitted by the 30th of April, automatically you'll be granted an extension to submit up to the end of May. But let me also bring the difference that happened in the previous financial year, Mikey, to say in the previous financial year, the minister and the minister alone granted companies extension to submit up to the 31st of July. But we are not saying this year it is going to be the case. Remember, during the previous financial year, that is where COVID was wreaking havoc. And as a result of that, we were on a lockdown. And because of a lockdown, many companies were not in the position to submit their WSP on time. As a result, the minister had to make concessions to grant companies extension. So it does not mean that for this year, it will also be like that. Should the minister also decide that he will grant extension, we will await a gazette. But as of now, we don't have any gazette from the minister. So what Mikey have explained is applicable until we get information or anything to the contrary from the Minister of Higher Education and Training. Thank you very much, Mikey. The next question is regarding unclaimed mandatory grant. What are the reasons for the unclaimed mandatory grant?
Okay. The reasons could be non-submission of the WSP, of course. You find that, like in our database, we've got a number of employers who are registered under the safety and security sector, but when it comes the period of submitting the WSP, we only receive few WSPs from the employers. So now, which means now, all this non-submission of the WSP will be shifted to the discretionary grant on the 15th of August, as contemplated in the SASSETA grant regulation. And another reason could be that you find that the company is no longer operating, or maybe the issue of insolvency that could lead the grant to be shifted over to the discretionary grant.
Okay, so you have cited two reasons. The first reason is non-submission of the WSP. You'll not receive your grant. The second reason is the company is defunct or no longer functional. The other reason?
Another reason could be unresolved queries, where you find that because we cannot evaluate the WSP for the whole year, we've got a period. There's a season for the WSP evaluation. And once that season has passed, it means now all the unresolved queries will be moved to, what is that status? Will be moved to rejected status. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mikey. What if an employer have submitted the WSP, Sasita have approved it, they are up to date with their skills development levies, and yet they still do not receive their mandatory grant? What might be the reason for that?
Okay, it could be that the employer is still under the process of inter-SASSETA transfer, which means now the levies that the employer is contributing is still sitting with another SASSETA. It has not been transferred to SASSETA's KIDI. So that is why now the SASSETA cannot process that payment.
Yeah, Maki is right. The other reason could be maybe their banking details have not been updated with SASSETA. So you can have everything on board, or you can have everything sorted out, WSP submitted, approved by SASSETA. When you check your SDL, you are up to date with your SDL, but still the system does not process you. That might be because you might not have updated your banking details. So ladies and gentlemen, it is very much important, even if when we have approved your WSP, even if when you are up to date with your skills development levies, make sure that you submit up-to-date banking details to SASSETA. That will help you to be paid on time. Thank you, Maggie, for your responses. What happens to the 1% of the levy?
Okay, the 1% of the levy, it's when now the Skills Development Levies Act says that an employer whose annual payroll exceeds 500,000 should contribute 1% of that amount towards the skills development levy. Now, when the employer prepare or compile their workplace skills plan, they need to ensure that the information populated in the workplace skills plan is correct and credible, so that the SASSETA could be able now to do the strategic planning based on the information drawn from the workplace skills plan.
Okay, thanks a lot, Maggie, for your response. Much appreciated. Lately, SASSETA is verifying annual training reports of companies. Why are we doing that?
Okay, the verification is about monitoring progress of the previous workplace skills plan so that we could identify any variance. And then if there's a variance between anticipated training and the actual training, the employer will have to give reasons to SASSETA why they could not stick to the planned interventions. And then during that process of verification, the verifier will request the employer to provide evidence of the training as reported in the annual training report. That's how we assess the progress of the previous workplace skills plan. It is based on evidence.
Okay, thank you very much. So what Maggie is basically trying to convey is that it does not necessarily mean once you have submitted your WSP is a done deal. You submit your WSP, but we still have got to come and check whether what you have planned is exactly what you have implemented, or you have indeed rolled out your training interventions as indicated in your workplace skills plan. So it is actually a verification or an evaluation mechanism to ensure that what we say we are going to roll out as training interventions within the workplace have indeed been rolled out. Thanks a lot, Maggie, for that response. The next question is, how do I register as a skills development facilitator with SASSETA?
Okay. To register as a skills development facilitator, you need to go to the SASSETA's website and then you click on the Indizam system. Mihloti will provide you with the hyperlink when it comes to the demonstration. Yeah, online demonstration. Mihloti will share with the stakeholders the hyperlink of how to access Indizam system. And then when you get to the Indizam system, you must you must scroll down to the register SSDF. You click on it, and then you have to populate your information, complete the form, and then what is important in that form is to now upload the appointment letter. The employer has to officially appoint you as a skills development facilitator so that the information could be submitted to SASSETA. But if you don't attach the appointment letter, it won't go through up until you attach the appointment letter. That's how information will go through to Sasita, and our administrators will assess your application and accept it. Once now you have accepted as a skills development facilitator, you'll be notified to say that these are your credentials, and then which is the username and the password that you must use. Every time when you access, if you want to access the InDism system, you have to enter the username and the password. And what is important there is that every 30 days, the system will request you to to change your password. That is very important. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your responses. Ladies and gentlemen, we also, at the moment, while we are dealing with the mandatory grant questions, we are also getting the discretionary grant questions. We will then shelve all of those discretionary grant questions and hand them over to the relevant SASSETA official to respond to all of the discretionary grant related questions. I think I have one more question for you, Maggie, is on the payment of the 20%. How does SASSETA go about disbursing the 20%? In terms of the quarterly disbursement, how do we go about doing it?
Okay. According to the presentation that I was sharing with our stakeholders, we indicated that payment of mandatory grant runs on a quarterly basis. Quarter one, we're looking at 30 April 2021. The second payment will run end of September, 30 September 2021, and the third quarter is expected to be paid end of December, but due to the SASSETA closure, that payment will be made earlier than that. If not first week, it will be second week. And last quarter, the payment is expected to run on the 31st of March 2022.
Thank you very much for that response. What is actually, in essence, Maggie trying to unpack, or what is she's actually unpacking, is that the 20% is not paid as a lump sum. The 20% is staggered over 4 installments, which are made on a quarterly basis. But one other thing that I need to indicate is that it is not automatic that you'll get paid quarterly. That will also depend whether you have money in your kitty. In case you don't have money in your kitty in a form of SDL, because the Department of Higher Education advises us from time to time who is up to date with their skills development levies, who is not up to date. So when you are up to date by June, then the first disbursement will be made. In cases you are not up to date in June, then we'll have what we call a top-up in September. If you have updated, if you have sorted out your skills development issues by the time we pay the second installment, then it means we'll then be in a position to pay the June quarterly payment as well as the September quarterly payment. So it is not that rigid. There are other conditions, because if there's no money in your kitty, we are not in the position to pay as SASSETA.
And to add on that, Program Director, the mandatory grant, only the levy payers, employers who are contributing 1%, has to claim payment of mandatory grant. If you are exempted from paying the skills development levy, you cannot expect any payment, 20% of the mandatory grant to be paid out to your company, because you are not contributing towards the skills development levy.
Okay. Here's another question, Maggie, on it is a discretionary grant related question, but at the same time, they are raising the issues of an ATR. The question says, what is the difference between the mandatory grant and discretionary grant when loading the WSP and the ATR?
Okay. The mandatory grant, I can only respond on the mandatory grant, because Lubabalo is coming later on to give presentation on discretionary grant. The mandatory grant is designated to fund the education and training for the employees. That is the grant, and the main reason for that is to improve the quality of labor market information.
Okay.
Because remember the WSP, when you populate information of the WSP, you need to give meaningful information on the WSP in terms of your employment profile, your age profile, even the gender and the population group. And then the scarce critical skills information is also important. All those information, you must do the analysis to identify what are the scarce and the critical skills of your organization. The pivotal training program, you need to identify what training your employees need in terms of pivotal. Because at the later stage, Lubabalo will explain what pivotal is, because the pivotal is only about the professional, vocational, and learning programs which are academic in nature. So those training must reflect on the WSP. But then if you leave a blank page on the scarce skills and the pivotal training intervention, you make Sasita's life difficult, because that information, we pull information out from your workplace skills plan to inform the update of the sector skills plan. So it is very important for the employer, when they draft their WSP, they must take that into consideration, to say that, you know what, let us give Sasita correct information so that they could come up with a meaningful sector skills plan that define the sector.
Thank you very much. I also see that there is a question that talk about Center of Specialization on apprenticeship funding. All of those questions, we'll package them for learning programs, because there's a difference between the MG and the DG, as we shall indicate at a later stage. The MG is rigid, it's fixed, it's 20% of your SDL. But the DG, the name explained for itself, is discretionary. So the SASSETA will apply their discretion to fund or not to fund based on the grant regulations that we normally follow. So ladies and gentlemen, I think now is about time that I release Ms. Molefe, but all of those questions that have got to do with learning programs or the discretionary grant, we will then package them and hand them over to the relevant SASSETA official. Thank you, Maggie, for your responses. We are now going to hand over to the next presentation. Thank you.